alleviating that harm.
Congressman Henry Waxman, Democrat of California. Thank you, sir, for talking to our viewers.
Thank you.
We'll have to leave it here.
Good.
Come back again.
Yeah.
The House is in session early today. They plan to vote on this Require a Plan Act, which would require the President to come up with a plan to balance the budget in 10 years. Live coverage of the House now.
The House will be in order. Prayer will be offered by our chaplain, Father CONROY.
Let us pray. God of the universe, thank you for giving us another day. As the Democratic caucus leaves for its retreat, bless each member with skills and the vision to fashion pathways to bringing about what is needed for the benefit of our nation. Bless the Republican Conference, which remains at the Capitol with the same gifts, consistent with their own defining skills and vision. In your wisdom, bless both parties with the grace that is needed to work together to benefit our people. May we all be faithful stewards of the nation bequeathed to us by our American ancestors. Please keep all who work for the People's House in good health, that they might faithfully fulfill the great responsibility given them in their service to the work of the Capitol. Bless us this day and every day. May all that is done be for your greater honor and glory. Amen.
Amen.
The Chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. Pledge of Allegiance today will be led by the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Walberg.
Join together in our pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Chair will entertain up to 5 requests for 1-minute speeches from each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan rise?
Address the House. 1 minute.
Does the gentleman ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute?
I ask that, Mr. Speaker.
So ordered.
Hardworking taxpayers in Michigan and across the country live within their means in a large part because they create responsible budgets. It's only natural that they expect the same from their government. A balanced budget is important to those of us who want to protect and save Medicare and Social Security. It's also important to the young workers and families who cannot afford to see their taxes go up. Unfortunately, the Senate and President have repeatedly failed at this basic duty. Last year, the President sent Congress a budget that never balanced, while the Senate hadn't the courage to even produce a budget in nearly 4 years. However, since the American people entrusted the Republicans with the majority in the House, my colleagues and I have twice passed a responsible budget to address our mounting debt and promote a healthy economy. Today, we'll also pass the Require a Plan Act, which would obligate the President to submit a budget that balances within 10 years or provides a supplemental budget that identifies with the federal budget, identifying it with the budget when it would balance. We believe there is a better way to tackle our nation's debt than higher taxes and the President's sequester. Together we can, no we must, produce solutions that get our debt crisis under control. Our neighbors and our families deserve our best effort.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlelady from the Virgin Islands seek recognition? The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Tomorrow, February 7th, is the 13th National Black HIV and AIDS Awareness Day. We represent 14% of the 1.1 million Americans living with HIV and account for 44% of all new infections. My district, the U.S. Virgin Islands, carries a disproportionate burden of this disease. From 2001 to 2005, the incidence of HIV infection in the territory increased by 19.4% and has increased every year since 1998. In 2008, HRSA estimated the combined HIV infection rate in people living with AIDS in the territory to be 1% of our population, and CDC reports that the Virgin Islands has one of the highest newly identified confirmed HIV positivity rates among African Americans in this country. Most, if not all of us, know someone who is living with HIV or has died from AIDS. Today, no one needs to die. Let's talk openly with our partners, family, and friends. Let's get educated. Let's get tested, and let's reduce stigma and discrimination. Tomorrow and every day, we will do more than commemorate those we have lost. We will rededicate ourselves to the work ahead. We can beat this disease. We can win this fight. Together, we can end this epidemic.
The gentlelady yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition? The gentleman is recognized.
I rise today to congratulate Allen High School in my district for a recent victory on December the 22nd. The Allen Eagles won the Texas State Championship with a score of 35-21 against Houston Lamar. And back in 2008, the Allen Eagles clinched their first Class 5A Division state title, and now in 2012, they've done it again. After completing their incredible 15-1 season, the Allen Eagles have officially been named to the 8th Annual Max Preps Football Tour of Champions. In the past 9 seasons, Tom Westerberg, head coach of the Eagles, has led his team to 2 state titles with a record of 102 wins to 16 losses. Comes as no surprise that he was named 2012 Dallas Area Coach of the Year. The Allen Eagles are known to be a team with heart, and it's now proven they have the heart of a champion. Congratulations, Allen Eagles, on a tremendous season. Way to represent the city of Allen and continuing the storied tradition of great high school football in North Texas. God bless you. I salute you.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Illinois seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, I rise to talk about the first piece of legislation I am introducing as a member of Congress. Like many people across Illinois, I learned at a young age that balancing the family pocketbook and living within our means is a question of values. I want to work together on common sense solutions that reduce the deficit while preserving the important services on which so many people rely. The bill I'm introducing today does just that. It is called the Government Waste Reduction Act. This bill moves forward on recommendations the Government Accountability Office made that would reduce duplication in government, save taxpayer money, enhance revenue, and root out waste. It establishes the Independent Government Waste Reduction Board, tasked with recommending legislative proposals that implement these cost-cutting measures and sending them to Congress. For example, the federal government has 47 job training programs, 44 of which overlap. Simply consolidating programs that overlap can save tens of billions of dollars while not impacting program quality. Common sense proposals to cut waste out of government already exist, but they are meaningless and save nothing unless we implement them. My bill will serve as a starting point to lower our deficits by tens of billions of dollars in a responsible, common sense way that protects the middle class. Thank you.
Gentlelady's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina seek recognition?
Consent to address the House 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, yesterday I sent a letter to the President to encourage him to support the MOX project, the mixed oxide fuel fabrication facility located in Aiken, Barnwell, and Allendale counties of South Carolina. This facility at the Savannah River site plays a vital role in allowing the United States to fulfill our international non-proliferation obligations by turning nuclear bombs into energy. The President has always supported this facility, which was initiated in the Clinton administration. The facility is over 50% completed and promotes our national security. Today's letter is supported by members from both sides of the aisle, which proves this issue is not partisan politics, but one of grave national security concern. It is my hope, as customers are identified, that the project will be completed, which supports environmental cleanup efforts at the Savannah River site. In conclusion, God bless our troops, and we will never forget September 11th in the global war on terrorism.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise as founding co-chair of the Bipartisan Congressional HIV/AIDS Caucus to mark National Black HIV/AIDS Awareness Day. Tomorrow, individuals and organizations across the nation, including in my own 13th Congressional District of California, will organize and advocate for HIV testing and treatment. In the United States, African Americans remain disproportionately affected by HIV and AIDS. This is especially true for young gay and bisexual men of color. While African American teenagers represent 15% of teenagers in the United States, they accounted for 69% of all cases reported among teenagers in 2010. The same is true for African American women, who accounted for 68% of all new HIV cases among women. Despite the progress we've made in recent years, this Congress has already made unconscionable budget cuts to critical programs that many families and communities rely on. A new analysis by the Foundation for AIDS Research and the National Minority AIDS Council shows that if budget sequestration were to take effect, communities of color would be disproportionately impacted, including more than 6,500 individuals who immediately lose access to HIV treatment. We must reject these cuts and expand effective prevention, care, and treatment programs so that we can once and for all stamp HIV and AIDS off the face of the earth.
The gentlelady's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Dakota seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, as inadequate as words are in expressing our gratitude to our American heroes who wear the uniform of our armed services, I rise to do my best to pay tribute to one very special soldier from North Dakota. Former Army Staff Sergeant Clinton Romeshay will be presented with the Medal of Honor next Monday by President Obama for acts of gallantry and intrepidity, becoming only the 4th living recipient for actions in the Afghanistan or Iraq. With the help of an assistant gunner, he took out a machine gun team before sustaining shrapnel from a grenade. The citation recalls his act of heroism this way. Quote, undeterred by his injuries, Staff Sergeant Romeshay continued to fight, and upon the arrival of another soldier to aid him and his assistant gunner, he again rushed through the exposed avenue to assemble additional soldiers. With complete disregard for his own safety, completely exposed himself to heavy enemy fire as he moved confidently about the battlefield, engaging and destroying multiple enemy targets, unquote. This young husband and father not only fought the enemy after sustaining his own wounds, but he organized air attacks and provided cover while 3 of his wounded comrades could get to aid, then pushed on to retrieve the bodies of fallen soldiers. Madam Speaker, I'm honored to serve in this prestigious assembly, always aware I do so because people like Staff Sergeant Clinton Romeshay serve me and our nation in ways we can't even imagine. May God bless Mr. Romeshay and his family and all of our American heroes who serve the cause of freedom around the world. Madam Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to congratulate the world champions of football, the Baltimore Ravens. On February the 3rd, the Vince Lombardi Trophy returned home to Charm City. Like Coach Harbaugh said, the win wasn't pretty, it wasn't perfect, but it was Baltimore. We overcame the doubts of a nation. Baltimore was just an afterthought, playing against a 3.5-point favorite. We overcame injury. Bernard Pollard, our safety, had played with not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5, but 6 broken ribs throughout the season. We overcame an agonizing 34-minute delay when we seemed to lose not only power in the stadium, but the wind in our sails. We overcame a second-half surge that left us screaming our televisions from Dundalk to Haverty Grace. I watched the game with my family and also my 92-year-old mother, and even she was fired up. The team stuck together and got it done. I want to congratulate the owner, Steve Bisciotti, a class act who does so much for our city on and off the field. Also, Ravens President Dick Cass and General Manager Ozzie Newsome, who has the greatest mind in football. And, of course, the players, especially number 52, Ray Lewis, and number 5, Joe Flacco, who won the MVP of the game. Last Sunday, the lights were out in the Superdome for a while, but at the end of the day, it was just lights out for the 49ers. Baltimore could not be more proud to welcome our players and the Vince Lombardi Trophy back home. And I also want to say our leader, Nancy Pelosi, who is homegrown Baltimore, she's now a 49ers fan, but she did accept the defeat with her regular class and dignity. I yield back.
Back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition? The gentlelady is recognized.
I want to rise, Madam Speaker, to congratulate, I was going to call him Dutch, Congresswoman Rupersberger and the other members of the Maryland delegation. More importantly, join them in congratulating the Ravens on they beat a mighty champion at the Super Bowl. As a proud 49er fan who grew up on Johnny Unitas in Baltimore, going to those games as a teenager and raising my own children on Joe Montana and Steve Young, you can just imagine how exciting this game was for me. But I think you quoted, Mr. Rupersberger, you quoted Coach Harbaugh. I will quote him in another way. They asked him after the game, was it hard coaching against your brother, your very own brother, in the Super Bowl? He said it was hard. It was very hard. The only thing that would have been worse is if one of us were not coaching in the Super Bowl. So while it was hard to lose to the Ravens, it would have been even harder to lose to someone else. If someone had to beat the 49ers, I congratulate the Ravens on a game well played. I was in the stadium. I wondered who on the Baltimore side decided to pull the plug on the electricity. They were wondering who on the 49er side did. In any event, there was good spirit. I think if you were there and you saw that delay of game, not term of art, but the broadcast, and you saw the mood of the people there, it was real tribute to the people of New Orleans, who had extended such gracious hospitality in every way that people were in a good mood and they rode out that time. I want to join you in commending the leadership, the ownership to Steve and for his leadership of the Ravens, but I also want to acknowledge the wonderful leadership of Art Modell. He passed away in the fall. After being such a great leader in the Baltimore community, bringing the Ravens to Baltimore, and in being a part of the city and philanthropic in other ways. He was a great man, and it was wonderful to see the Ravens with the art on there, and everyone else, including Governor O'Malley and Mayor Rawlings Lake, with their art on their lapels throughout the weekend. So to Art Modell's family, to the ownership of the Ravens, congratulations to the people of Baltimore. I know how exciting it is and what it means to Baltimore, so I extend congratulations. And I also don't have a bet, because I said while I'm rooting for the 49ers, I would never bet against Baltimore. So congratulations to all concerned. Thank you. Yield back, my time.
The gentlewoman yields back her time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition? Now recognize Congressman Dr. Tom Price.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may be allowed to revise and extend their remarks on H.R. 44, the Require Plan Act.
No objections. So ordered.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 1 minute of time to the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock.
For the gentleman suspend. Pursuant to House Resolution 48 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House and the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the purpose of consideration of H.R. 444. Will the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Ross-Leitonen, kindly take the chair?
The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the further consideration of H.R. 444, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill to require that if the President's budget for fiscal year 2014 budget does not achieve balance in a fiscal year covered by such budget, the President shall submit a supplemental unified budget by April 1, 2013, which identifies a fiscal year in which balance is achieved and for other purposes.
When the Committee of the Whole rose on Tuesday, February 5, 2013, 30 minutes remained in general debate. The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Price, and the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Von Hollen, each have 15 minutes remaining. Who yields time?
Madam
The gentleman
Chair.
from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Madam Chairman, a family that earns $27,000 but spends $36,000 and has run up a credit card debt of $165,000 is obviously on the brink of financial ruin. Proportionally, that is exactly where our federal government is today. Now, if that family went to see a credit counselor, the first thing he's going to tell them is, we've got to sit down and draw up a budget. Now, that family's going to have to make some very difficult choices. It may take several years to work its way back to solvency. But our Senate has not passed a budget in nearly 4 years, and our President has offered only entirely unserious budgets that continue to spend recklessly and that never balance. This bill simply requires if the President can't balance the budget this year, he tells us how long it would take and what needs to be done to do so. We would expect that from any family. We should demand it from our government.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. As we debated yesterday, the bill before us is unfortunately nothing more than a political gimmick at a time when we're facing huge issues with respect to jobs in the economy. It's very unfortunate that we did not have an opportunity to vote on an amendment that we proposed to replace the sequester, which is now less than a month away and which will do grave economic harm. Our proposal to replace that sequester with a balanced mix of cuts and revenue from closing loopholes. But in this body, which says it wants to be transparent, and the People's House, we were denied an opportunity to take a vote on something that's very important to the American people, as opposed to playing the political games we've been playing with this bill. With that, I yield to the distinguished Democratic leader, a representative from San Francisco, and the daughter of Baltimore, the home of the Super Bowl champions, the Ravens.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Well, if the Ravens
one
and the
minute.
49ers
1 minute.
fans can come together, hopefully so can the Democrats and the Republicans on an issue of this grave concern to our country, our budget, which should be a statement of our national values. Instead, as Mr. Van Hollen said, we see the Republicans playing games with the budget. Playing games. That's what they have been doing, and that's what they continue to do as we go into this spring, where we need to find solutions. Playing games. I give new meaning to the term March Madness, because that's what will result if we have to face a sequester. It's a very bad idea. A sequester should be out of the question, and we should be talking about how we find a solution instead of a sequester. Mr. Van Hollen offered a solution. Here we have the debate on the budget, the blueprint for how we go forward. And the Rules Committee, dominated by the Republican majority, has said we won't even let your proposal come to the floor, not in the form of an amendment or a substitute in any other way. And what are they afraid of? They are afraid of common sense, because that is what Mr. Van Hollen's proposal is about. It recognizes that we need to have spending cuts. In fact, we've already agreed to $1.6 trillion in spending cuts in the Budget Control Act. It recognizes that we must address the entitlement issue. In fact, Democrats have already agreed to more than $1 trillion in Medicare savings to strengthen Medicare and to protect beneficiaries. So with that as a basis, we go forward with the Van Hollen proposal, which is a very common sense solution. It says it is a plan. It is a plan to replace sequester. It cuts further, makes further spending cuts in a responsible way. It ends tax breaks for big oil, and it ensures that millionaires pay their fair share. Who could be opposed to that? So let's get serious. It's time for us to get serious. We have a serious challenge. We should be working in a bipartisan way to find a solution. Instead, again, the Republicans are playing games leading up to make March Madness a term that would be inadequate to the consequences to our children, millions of whom will be affected in terms of their education and their well-being, to our seniors, to our veterans, to our safety in the streets in terms of cops on the beat. The list of cuts across the board and a meat-axe approach, which no common sense given to it, is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And let's stop this march to folly, this March madness. Let's get serious. Let's accept the President's challenge that he put forth. If we can't have a big, bold, and balanced solution now, let's at least do something that is balanced and bold as we go forward to the end of the fiscal year, as Mr. Van Hollen has proposed, so that we can do what is right for the American people instead of what is wrong for our economy. What the Republicans are proposing is a blueprint for a downward spiral in our economy. It's irresponsible. It does not have value in terms of being solution-oriented. And I might add in conclusion, Madam Speaker, that I'm listening attentively to this debate, and I hear my colleagues on the Republican side talking about how important it is to reduce the deficit, and we are in total agreement on that subject. I think we have a moral obligation to reduce the deficit. I think we have a moral obligation to create jobs, to put people to work, because growth, in addition to spending cuts and revenue increases, growth is what's going to help us reduce the deficit. But I didn't hear one boo out of any of the people, not one little hoot, one little peep, or any other sound an endangered species of a deficit hawk would have made during the President Bush's term when most of this deficit was amassed. Tax cuts for the wealthiest people, which did not create jobs but increased the deficit. Give away to the pharmaceutical companies with an ill-advised pharmaceutical plan, and 2 unpaid for wars. 2 unpaid for wars. Just not fair to investments that we should be making in America's future, whether it's biomedical research to create cures and to keep America preeminent in terms of science, whether, again, it's invested in the seed corn and the education of our children. The list goes on and on. The list goes on and on of all of the initiatives that are important to growth, to making our future brighter, to keeping America competitive, to keeping America #1. So I urge a strong rejection of what the Republicans are proposing. It's frankly silly, and as I said before, unworthy of the challenge that our country faces and the bipartisan solutions that we should be trying to achieve. I urge a no vote and yield back the balance.
The gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is probably appropriate to refocus ourselves on the bill that we're discussing today, that's before us today, H.R. 444. It simply does one thing. It says to the President, when you bring a budget to Congress, tell us when it's going to balance. That's all it does. Now, the sequester is an important issue. There's no doubt about it. President Obama's sequester is an important issue. And the House Republicans have passed two times, spending reductions that prioritize in a much more responsible way. We agree that it ought to be much more responsible. The ball's in the Senate's court. The ball's in the President's court. This bill, though, simply says to the President, when you bring your budget to us, just let us know when it balances. And that's important because the last 4 budgets that the President has brought to this House, to this Congress, have never, ever balanced. I'm pleased to yield a minute and a half to the gentleman from Tennessee, Dr. Desjardins.
The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank my colleague for his leadership on this issue. This is the 4th time in 5 years that the White House has proven that it does not take trillion-dollar deficits seriously enough to submit a budget on time. In contrast, House Republicans, since taking the majority in 2010, have done that every year and will do so again in just a couple of weeks. We still do not know when the President plans on actually submitting his budget. When asked, the White House Press Secretary Jay Carney said that the administration favors substance over deadlines. Let me translate that for you. They don't have a solution to addressing the nation's spending and debt crisis. Today, the House will pass the Require a Plan Act. And I'm hearing comments that this is a gimmick, this is a ploy. Are you kidding me? We need to do our job. All we're asking, the American people get it. They want Congress to work together. They're not in love with Republicans or Democrats right now. They want us to solve this problem. It's sad that we have to resort to a Require a Plan Act to get the other side to work with us. Please work with us. We have submitted budgets. We need the Senate to submit a budget. Every missed deadline is a missed opportunity. We need to get serious about spending now, and we cannot continue to delay the choices that we need to make. We owe it to our future generations. And with that, I yield back.
And yields back. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. For those members of this body who were not focused on this debate yesterday, let's make a couple things clear. The President will introduce a budget. He is going to submit a budget. He has submitted a budget every year. Our Republican colleagues don't like his budget because he takes a balanced approach to reducing the deficit, meaning that in addition to cuts, he also calls for additional revenue from taking away special tax breaks for special interest, number one. Number two, what this bill does is, number one, require the President to submit his budget in a certain way, and number two, criticizes the President for submitting his budget late. Again, for those who weren't part of the debate yesterday, the reason the President's budget is late is because we had to pass the fiscal cliff agreement. We didn't get that done until January 2nd. And I have to say, Madam Chairman, we got it done despite the overwhelming opposition of House Republicans. We were pleased to get the overwhelming support of Senate Republicans, but House Republicans continued to take the position that they were prepared to go over the fiscal cliff in order to protect tax breaks for very wealthy people. But that's why the President's budget is late, because any American family knows if you don't know what revenue is coming in, you can't put together your household budget. And we didn't know what kind of revenue was coming in until January 2nd. So with that, Madam Chairman, I yield 2 minutes to the distinguished ranking member of the Ways and Means Committee, Mr. Levin.
The gentleman is recognized. Without objection.
The Republican mantra is no revenues, cuts at any price, whether it damages health research, our kids' education, our national defense, or our national economy. So beneath their new talk of softening their image remains their hard edge. Now we're less than a month away from a sequester, $85 billion in arbitrary across-the-board cuts just in 2013. Just yesterday, the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office warned us that allowing the sequester budget cuts to take effect would reduce GDP growth by more than 25% this year, wiping out hundreds of thousands of jobs, and pushing the unemployment rate back up to 8%. So I say to the Republicans, instead of opening your arms to the sequester and risking our nation's economic recovery, Republicans should be opening their minds to a balanced, bipartisan solution. I yield back.
Back. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm pleased to yield 1 minute to our distinguished Majority Leader, the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. CANTOR.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank the gentleman. Thank the Madam Chair. On Monday, the President missed the deadline for submitting his fiscal year 2014 budget. So unfortunately, we haven't yet seen what the President will propose to address our exploding debt. But if the President's 2014 budget is similar to his plan from last year, it will never achieve balance. Not next year, not in 10 years, not even in 30 or 40 years. Apparently, the President does not believe we have a spending problem in America. Unfortunately, the facts tell us that we do. Federal spending is 22% higher than it was in January of '09. And debt held by the public nearly doubled by the end of the President's first term after 4 consecutive trillion-dollar deficits. The seriousness of this problem was underlined yesterday when the CBO told us that unless changes are made, federal debt held by the public will reach 76% of our GDP by the end of this year, the highest level since 1950, when the bills were fresh from winning World War II. The American people recognize that perpetual large federal deficits threaten their economic security. That's why recent Pew Research Center polls showed 72% of respondents said reducing the deficit should be a top priority for national leaders. That was second only to the 86% who cited strengthening the economy and improving the jobs outlook. Concern about the deficit has risen from 9th among 20 issues 4 years ago to 3rd in last month's survey. People are worried about what perpetual federal overspending will mean to their future. Will taxes on low and middle income working families have to rise to pay the bills we're racking up? Will inflation kick in, eating away at the incomes of senior citizens living on fixed incomes who already struggle to pay for gas and groceries? Will our economy stagnate as government demand for capital crowds out private sector borrowers who want to expand their businesses? Will our kids be condemned to a lower standard of living once our overseas creditors become concerned we won't be able to pay them back? These are real concerns. These are the reasons we brought the PLAN Act to the floor today, and I thank the gentleman from Georgia for his leadership. Life teaches that if you don't have a plan, you're planning to fail. And this President does not have any plans to balance a federal budget, ever. The House has developed a plan to balance a budget, and we voted on it twice. This year, we intend to improve on that plan and balance the budget even sooner than our prior proposals called for, within 10 years. But we can't do it alone. We need to have the cooperation of the President and the other body to make any meaningful progress. Last month, we enacted the No Budget, No Pay law, which requires both houses of Congress to adopt a budget by April 15th. Now we are hearing that the other body is planning on producing its first budget since '09, so we're making some progress. The PLAN Act is the next step in this process. It will require the President to tell us when he thinks the balanced budget can be achieved and how he'd get us there. If his budget submission does not balance, he'll have to submit a supplemental budget by April 1st, telling us the earliest date when balance can be achieved. And he'll have to show us the policies he'll use to make that calculation. This way, we can begin to develop a common destination. Until we are all headed in the same direction, we'll never get there. The public is telling us we need to reduce the deficit and balance the budget. The PLAN Act will help us do that, and I urge adoption of the bill, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This bill is entitled the PLAN Act. What we really need is a plan to avoid the sequester, these across-the-board, indiscriminate cuts. They're going to take place on March 1st, which we all know are going to hurt jobs in the economy. We just heard from the Republican leader. Last September, he made a very good point on the floor of this House. He said if you allow those sequester cuts to take place, you're going to see more than 200,000 jobs lost just in the state of Virginia, just in the defense sector. And yet the across-the-board cuts are going to hurt jobs in defense, but they're also going to hurt other jobs as well as important national efforts, whether it's the FBI, whether it's border security, whether it's medical research at the National Institutes of Health. All those things are going to be cut. Now, the majority leader just made the point that when the American people ask what their #1 priority is, jobs in the economy. So why aren't we doing something about jobs in the economy? Why did the Republican leadership deny us an opportunity just to have a vote on a plan to prevent that sequester from taking place in less than a month, a plan that would replace that sequester with a mix of long-term targeted cuts as well as revenues from, for example, getting rid of the taxpayer subsidies for the big oil companies. That's the real plan we need, and yet we haven't seen any plan from our Republican colleagues in this 113th Congress. So let's focus on what really is important to the American people. The deficit is, of course, important to the American people, as the Republican leader said, ranked number 2. There's no debate there. The issue all along has been not whether we reduce the deficit, but how we do it, making sure, number 1, we don't do it in a way that hurts the economy, like some of the austerity plans in Europe, which apparently our Republican colleagues would like us to copy. That's hurt the economy. We saw it didn't work in the UK. And we believe we need to reduce the deficit in a balanced way, cuts, but also revenue, by asking very wealthy people to contribute a little bit more, and by closing those tax breaks that we heard about from the Republican presidential and vice presidential candidate all last fall. Those tax breaks are still out there. We propose to eliminate some of those for the purpose of reducing the deficit in a balanced way. That's the plan we need. That's the plan we've offered. And unfortunately, that's the plan we haven't had a chance to even get a vote on. I reserve the balance of our time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. How much time remains on each side?
The gentleman has 10 3/4 time remaining, and the gentleman from Maryland has 8 minutes remaining.
I thank the Chair. I want to commend my friend from Maryland on the other side for trying to change the subject. There's a lot of talk over here about the sequester. That's an important issue. There's no doubt about it, and we look forward to that debate. But this is about having the President submit a budget to Congress that balances. And we're concerned about that because the last 4 budgets that this President has submitted to this Congress have never, ever balanced. I'm pleased to yield 1.5 minutes to the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Wilson.
The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to thank the gentleman for yielding. I am grateful for Congressman Tom Price and his tremendous leadership on this very important issue of balancing the budget. Congressman Price has a vision for fiscal responsibility which creates jobs. Spending money that we do not have is irresponsible. For the past 4 years, the federal government has spent over $1 trillion more each year than it receives. American families know better than spending beyond their means without consequences. The government should stop passing on depressing debt to our younger citizens. House Republicans recognize the national security risks are at stake if we fail to get our spending under control. I hope the Senate and President will adopt actual solutions that will decrease the size of skyrocketing national debt. The passage of Require a Plan Act will be a significant step. By requiring the President to propose a budget that balances over a 10-year period, the American people will begin to restore their faith in Washington and believe that hope and prosperity are the future for our nation. Balancing our budget not only protects and preserves entitlement programs for our seniors and future generations, it also provides economic certainty, which helps American small businesses create jobs. As a grateful co-sponsor of this legislation, I urge my colleagues and those across the aisle to put party politics aside and vote in favor of the bill. I yield the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
I reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm pleased to yield 1.5 minutes to the member of the Budget Committee and the Ways and Means Committee, the gentlelady from Tennessee, Ms. Blythe.
The gentlelady from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yesterday, the President took to the White House briefing room to lecture, as he has done before, on the virtues of the so-called balanced approach to budgeting. However, while he failed to mention that his balanced approach would never lead to a balanced budget, his last 4 years have made that abundantly clear. It's long past time for the President to level with Congress and the American people about what his so-called balanced approach will actually balance the budget. Now, today the House will take up the Require a Plan Act, which will force the President to do just that. By requiring the President to explain when and how he would balance the budget, we can begin to have an honest and constructive discussion about what is actually going to take to prevent a debt crisis. History and math tell us that our fiscal challenges can only be solved through responsible budgeting that cuts spending and reforms entitlements. The President's incessant demand for higher taxes is not a solution to our fiscal problems, but rather a deceptive rhetoric that cannot withstand the scrutiny of basic math or honest budgeting. No amount of tax hikes will ever be able to steer us away from a looming debt crisis we face. Averting the most predictable crisis in U.S. history is not a question of how, but a question if
the President will have the courage and the foresight to work with the House Republicans to lead our country out of economic stagnation and away from a future limited by mountains of debt. Thank you. I yield back my time.
The gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think it's important to remind our colleagues that as part of the Budget Control Act and other measures we took over the last several years, we have already cut $1.5 trillion over the 10-year budget period by placing a cap on spending. The President has been very clear, as have Democrats in the Congress. We understand we've got to make some important cuts. We did $1.5 trillion. We can do more. In fact, the substitute amendment that I proposed would eliminate these direct payments for agribusinesses, over $29 billion in unnecessary subsidies. So the question isn't whether we should do cuts. Yes, we should do them. We should do them in a smart way, not an across-the-board way. But we should also generate revenue by closing the tax loopholes to reduce the deficit. We heard, again, from our Republican colleagues throughout the last presidential campaign about all these tax breaks that benefit very wealthy people. Let's close them to help reduce the deficit. And that's exactly what our substitute would do to help replace the sequester. I'm now pleased to yield 2 minutes from a terrific new member of Congress from the state of Maryland, someone who knows these issues well, Mr. DELANEY.
The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you. So in my judgment, Mr. Simpson and Mr. Bowles are American heroes because they were given a job by the President of the United States. And it was a very difficult job, and the assignment required significant vision. And their job was to work in a bipartisan way with experts and come up with a proposal that was in the best interest of the common good of American citizens. And that's exactly what they did. And the fact that it was rejected by our government, in my judgment, is a tragedy. And if you contrast what they did to what we're considering here today with H.R. 444, it puts into context exactly the problems we have with this Congress. Because what Mr. Simpson and Mr. Bowles did is they came up with a specific proposal that had additional revenues and had important cuts to put the country on a better fiscal trajectory. And so we're not here debating what proposal we should put in place to put this country on a better fiscal trajectory. That would be a worthy discussion. Nor are we talking about the things we need to do as a country to make our country more competitive, to create jobs. We're not talking about immigration reform. We're not talking about a national energy policy. We're not talking about investing in our infrastructure. What we're talking about is a gimmick that has nothing to do with the substance of the fiscal debate that we need to have in this country. This proposal, this bill, is a gimmick for career politicians in their game of chess. It has nothing to do with the substance of what the American people need us to do as a Congress. We need to adopt the framework that was put forth by the Simpson-Bowles Commission, where people actually did their job. And we need to use that as a framing document to deal with our fiscal trajectory. And then we need to get on with the business of making this country more competitive so we can create jobs that have a good standard of living. And to do that, we need to change important policies in this country around immigration, energy, and infrastructure and education. That's what the business of this Congress should be. Thank you.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm pleased to yield a minute and a half to a new member on our side of the aisle, the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Meadows.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for yielding to the gentleman. I rise in support of H.R. 444, the Require a Plan Act. And as a small business owner, I understand the importance of a balanced budget. Ensuring that you spend within your means is vital to your employees and the success of that business. Spending beyond your means that you could result in layoffs, mothers and fathers not being able to put food on the table, and ultimately could mean the demise of that company. I get it. Families from my district in western North Carolina get it. Just last week, Eric from Asheville wrote to my office saying, and I quote, "To me, it's just basic math. This is how most people that have a budget work. If you're in debt, you either need to spend less and cut back or make more money. So I spend less and I cut back on some of the things that are not essential. Why can't our government figure it out? I agree with Eric from Asheville, North Carolina, and that's why I'm a proud co-sponsor of Representative Tom Price, Require a Plan Act, which will force President Obama to explain how he intends to balance our budget. It's time for the federal government to do what Americans, hard-working, tax-paying Americans and small business owners from across the country have to do. Balance a budget and live within our means. The time is now. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
I reserve, Madam Chairman.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm pleased to yield 1 minute. I'm pleased to yield 1 minute to another new member of our conference, the gentleman who knows from Texas, who knows a significant amount about budgets, and a new member of the Budget Committee, Mr. Williams.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 444, the Require a Plan Act. I am a small business owner, and I have submitted a budget to my bank for 41 straight years. It is astounding that the President has shirked his responsibility to submit a budget on time for 4 of the last 5 years. Our nation has trillion-dollar deficits. They are threatening the economic future of this great country. Yet the President and his Democratic Party leaders in the Senate have made it a habit to ignore their budgetary obligations. Under President Obama, the national debt has increased faster than under any U.S. president in history. Now is not the time to sit back and continue racking up debt that our children and our grandchildren will have to shoulder, not to mention small businesses. The American people deserve better leadership. They have made it abundantly clear that Congress should balance the federal budget, just like families and business owners do across the country, and they do it every single day. That's why I support the House bill requiring the President to submit a balanced budget and get Washington's spending under control. I urge my colleagues on both sides to vote yes on this bill. Also,
time has expired.
I remember that Ronald Reagan's birthday is today. May God bless our country. Thank you.
Gentleman from Maryland continues to reserve, and the gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm pleased to yield 1.5 minutes to another new member of our conference, the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Bridenstine.
The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I rise today to support H.R. 444, the Require a Plan Act. It is perfectly appropriate for the President to present a budget that balances within 10 years. If he does not, this bill would require him to tell us when his budget might balance. Trillion-dollar deficits for the foreseeable future are harming seniors, the poor, and middle-income families struggling to make ends meet. Here's how. Our deficits are financed by Treasury bonds, most of which are being purchased by the Fed with newly created money. This drives up the price of bonds and keeps interest rates artificially low. Seniors on fixed incomes who have saved their whole lives now cannot make a fair market on their interest for their savings. In addition to squeezing the incomes of our seniors, creating money to fund deficit also drives up prices, which has a disproportionate adverse effect on seniors, on the poor, and on middle-income families. Creating money out of thin air to fund the President's spending must stop. The first step is to stop the reckless spending by having the President present a plan to balance the budget. This is a simple request with no reasonable excuse for opposition. I support H.R. 444, the Require a Plan Act, to protect our seniors, the poor, and middle-income families. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Madam Chairman, again, we've heard a number of the last speakers complain about the fact that the President's budget will be a little late this year. Again, for the new members joining us, and we welcome all the new members, Republicans and Democrats, in the last session of Congress, we were here until January 2nd trying to put together an agreement to avoid the fiscal cliff. That was the President's priority, to make sure that we didn't hurt jobs in the economy by going over the fiscal cliff. The overwhelming majority of our Republican colleagues in this House voted against that plan because they were more focused on protecting tax breaks for very wealthy individuals than about protecting jobs in the economy. That's their choice. Their Senate Republican colleagues made a different choice, but our House Republican colleagues can make the choice that they want. Now, with respect to the budget, the President will submit a budget, and our House Republican colleagues can reject it or do what they want with it. The issue is not whether he'll submit a budget. He will. The issue is whether or not we would dictate to the President what the form of his budget should take, and that is wrong. It is also a little curious to hear this newfound support for these sort of balanced budgets from our Republican colleagues. I would just remind everybody, the last time we had a balanced budget was at the end of the Clinton administration. Why? Because in addition to economic growth, they asked the American people to contribute a little bit more in terms of tax revenue. The Bush administration came in and immediately squandered those surpluses. Now, I think it's important to know that since 1950, we've had a balanced budget on only 8 occasions, unfortunately. The last time we had a Republican president who balanced his budget without inheriting it from a Democratic president was Dwight Eisenhower. So we're pleased that our Republican colleagues are joining us in trying to get back to fiscal responsibility. We see reducing the deficit as a very important part of that, but we disagree that we should do it by cutting important commitments we've made to seniors, by slashing our investment in our kids' education, by cutting science and research and things that help power our economy and make us competitive. We think that's the wrong approach. We need a balanced approach that combines cuts with revenues from closing these tax breaks for the purpose of reducing the deficit. That's the kind of plan we need, and I reserve the balance of our time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, sometimes in these conversations and debates, Madam Chair, it's important to set the record straight. My friend from Maryland says that the reason the President hasn't been able to submit his budget on time, by the way, the law, February 4th, the first Monday in February, the reason was because of what happened at the end of the last year. Well, I would remind my colleague that President Obama has missed the budget deadline more than any other president. In the 90 years since the President has been required to submit a budget to Congress by the first Monday in February, President Obama is the only president to miss the deadline 2 years in a row, and he's the only president to miss the deadline 3 out of 4 years in his first term. So just to set the record straight. Secondly, I would also remind my friend from Maryland that the last time this country had a balanced budget, it was a Republican Congress that did it. In fact, it took President Clinton he vetoed the budget twice and then signed it, but it was a Republican Congress, and we reduced taxes at that time. I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to our policy chair on the Republican side, the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Lankford.
The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman, and I thank Madam Speaker as well for recognizing me. Back home last week, I had a gentleman that came up to me who said, I make $80,000 a year between my wife and I. That has always been enough until now. And with the economy slowing down and prices continuing to increase, it's not enough. What is going on? The simple statement that I can make to him is the economy continues to slow down because the federal government continues to borrow more and more money for its own debt, taking that money out of the private sector's hands, which would typically increase the economy, increase jobs, increase economic activity, but instead right now it's all coming towards the federal government as we require more and more money, slowing the economy down more and more. The unemployment rate under this president has been higher longer than the last 11 presidents combined. There is something unique that I can say to the college student coming out of college that can't find a job. This is not a typical American economy. What's going on? We're borrowing too much money. We're slowing down the economy. It's not stimulating. It's hurting what's going on. This simple bill just says this. As is already required by law for the House, the Senate, and the President to all put a budget out, this also says, let's put a budget out because of the dire times that we are in. It says, at some point in the next 10 years, let's bring it to balance. Now, when the President sent his folks over last year to the Budget Committee to present the President's budget, I asked specifically, does this budget balance at any point? 10 years, 25 years, 75 years, is there a point of balance? And the response was, no. We're just asking for things to balance sometime. Tell us when there's a proposed balance out there. Have a plan. Right now we have no plan to plan, and that needs to change. The Senate doesn't have a budget for the last 4 years at all. The President presents a budget that never balances. After the fiscal cliff issues and after all the things that have happened, our tax revenue estimated by CBO will go up 25% next year. It is estimated that our revenues next year will be the highest revenue in the history of the United States. Yet the President still comes back and says he needs more revenue. We need to find areas to cut. We need a plan. We need to get into balance.
The gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Maryland.
May I inquire how much time remains on each side?
The gentleman from Maryland has 2.5 minutes remaining, and the gentleman from Georgia has 15 seconds remaining.
And I'm prepared to close, so I'll be
All right.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chairman. Again, just to put all this in perspective, I appreciate the sort of newfound vigor with which our Republican colleagues are approaching this issue. I would just remind them that in the budget that they brought to this floor in the last 2 years, it did not balance, according to CBO, until 2040. And even then, if you read what the Congressional Budget Office said, it wasn't as a result of the Congressional Budget Office's analysis of their policies. It was simply based on assumptions that our Republican colleagues provided to the CBO. So the real question here is, how do we reduce our deficits in a way that does not hurt the economy right now, but does make sure that as the economy improves, that public spending is not, and deficit spending does not squeeze out private investment. Actually, for the last couple of years, the problem has been the opposite. We've seen less private investment, and so the monies the federal government has spent have been very important to helping the economy from going into free fall. But there's no doubt that we've got to come up with a balanced approach to dealing with this issue in the out years, and that's where the debate lies in how we should do that. And again, our Republican colleagues have said no to the balanced approach. They've said no to the plan that we offered to prevent the sequester, and they didn't say no. They wouldn't even allow a vote on the plan we offered to prevent the sequester that's going to hit on March 1st, and which our Republican colleagues in statement after statement on this floor have said is going to hurt the economy, and which we know from the last quarter's economic report is already hurting the economy just because businesses are anticipating the possibility of these across-the-board cuts. So that's the plan that we should be focused on. That's a plan that helps the economy, that will help save jobs, and it's just unfortunate that we've been denied an opportunity in the people's house to even have a vote on the one plan that's been submitted in this Congress, in this House, to prevent those job losses and prevent the harm being done to our economy. So I would hope, Madam Chairman, that we put aside this political gimmick. The President will submit a budget. Our Republican colleagues can do with it whatever they want. But let's put aside the political games and focus on jobs in the economy, and let's have a vote on the plan that we have introduced to prevent that sequester from taking place and prevent the economic damage that it would do. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
The gentleman's time has expired, and the gentleman from